All right, so we're diving deep today into something pretty wild. MDMA-assisted psychotherapy for PTSD.
Whoa.
I know, right? It sounds a little out there using MDMA for healing, but hear us out.
Yeah.
We got our hands on this treatment manual straight from the researchers, and let me tell you, some of these stories are unbelievable.
It really makes you rethink what we think about, both PTSD and the role of substances in therapy, right?
It does. It makes you question like everything you thought you knew. But okay, before we get too far ahead, let's back up a sec. PTSD is a lot more than just going through something awful. It's how that trauma gets stuck with you, like in your mind and body.
Yeah, it's like your nervous system gets stuck in overdrive, that fight or flight mode,
Yeah.
even when there's no danger.
Right.
And that's where the three core symptom clusters of PTSD come in.
Okay.
Hyperarousal, intrusive re-experiencing, and avoidance.
So break those down for me. What does that actually look like for someone?
So hyperarousal, it's like you're always on edge. You're jumpy, restless, maybe you can't sleep, or every little noise makes you jump.
Oh, yeah. And then there's intrusive re-experiencing. That's when the trauma comes back, like in flashbacks, nightmares, intrusive thoughts.
Oh, wow.
And then you have avoidance. You try to avoid anything that reminds you of the trauma, even if it means isolating yourself or numbing out your emotions.
So it really impacts like your whole life.
It does.
It makes sense why like traditional treatments don't always work.
Yeah, a lot of current treatments for PTSD have limitations.
Yeah.
Some people don't respond to them at all. And even for those who do, the effects might not last.
Yeah.
That's why researchers are always looking for new approaches. And that's where this MDMA-assisted psychotherapy comes in.
Okay, so this is where things get really interesting. How does MDMA, which isn't something you usually think of with therapy, actually help people heal from PTSD?
Well, the important thing is that MDMA is not a cure on its own. It's more like a catalyst.
Okay.
It helps create the conditions in therapy where healing can happen.
Like a tool for the therapist to use.
Yeah.
Exactly. MDMA has these unique properties that make it well suited for this. For one, it can temporarily reduce fear and defensiveness, so someone can engage with their trauma memories without being overwhelmed.
Oh, wow. I can see how that would be huge
Yeah.
for someone living with that constant fear and anxiety.
Absolutely. And then it can also increase feelings of trust and connection, particularly with the therapist, which is so important for creating a safe space where you can do this deep work.
You're talking about that therapeutic alliance that's like crucial.
Yes, exactly. And here's the other thing. MDMA enhances emotional processing. But without blocking the memories or numbing the feelings, you're fully present with your emotions, which is vital for working through trauma.
So you can face those emotions head on instead of just trying to like push them down or avoid them.
Exactly. But while MDMA can be a powerful tool, it's just one piece of the puzzle.
Right.
The therapists, they play a crucial role in guiding the healing process and making sure the person feels safe.
So let's talk about that. What does the therapeutic approach actually look like in MDMA-assisted psychotherapy?
Well, it's all about creating a space where the individual feels safe and empowered to heal at their own pace. The therapists use a non-directive approach, so they're following the individual's lead instead of pushing an agenda.
So it's less about the therapist interpreting everything and more about trusting the person's own inner wisdom.
That's a great way to put it. The therapists are providing the scaffolding, and the individual is building their own path to recovery.
I love that.
Yeah.
So what are some of the techniques? Like, what are the therapists actually doing?
A lot of it is empathetic listening, truly hearing and validating the person's experience without judgment. There's minimal encouragement, like offering suggestions but not forcing anything. And sometimes with permission, they might use nurturing touch to provide comfort during difficult moments.
So it's a very respectful and compassionate approach.
It is. It's all about letting the person heal at their own pace. Now, before we even get to the actual MDMA session, there's a lot of prep work involved.
Really? So it's not just, show up and take MDMA. There's more to it.
Oh, yeah. There's a whole process to get ready. First, making sure that MDMA-assisted therapy is even right for this person. Not everyone is a good candidate.
Yeah, I imagine that screening is super important with such an intense experience.
Absolutely. And once it's deemed appropriate, they spend a lot of time building that therapeutic alliance. Remember, trust is key when you're dealing with trauma. So the therapists get to know the person, understand their history, and build rapport.
Makes sense that feeling safe and connected with the therapist would be crucial.
Yeah.
Before someone can really open up.
Exactly. And they also talk about expectations and fears, like any concerns the person has about the process.
I bet that helps with the anxiety going to it.
It does. And finally, they set intentions for the session. It's not about forcing a specific outcome, but more about having a sense of purpose.
Setting a direction and seeing where the journey takes them.
I like that. Now, are you ready to step into a typical MDMA-assisted session and see what it's like?
I'm ready. Let's hear it. What does this experience actually look like?
Okay, so picture this. A comfortable, non-clinical setting. More like a cozy living room than a doctor's office.
Okay.
Maybe the person is lying on a futon covered in blankets with the therapists nearby.
So the environment is important.
Very important. As the MDMA starts kicking in, there's often this initial phase of anxiety management and guidance. It's normal to feel a little anxious as the medicine takes hold.
Makes sense given the intensity of what they're about to do. What happens next?
Well, the therapists are there to support and reassure the person, help them navigate those feelings, and then, as the MDMA reaches its peak, a whole new world opens up. This is where things get really fascinating.
Okay, I'm on the edge of my seat. Tell me more.
This is the time for processing trauma, allowing those memories and emotions to come up without being completely overwhelming. It's like the MDMA turns down the volume on the fear so you can actually listen to what your memories are trying to tell you.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
So they can revisit those events but not feel trapped by them.
Right. And it's also a time for gaining new perspectives on the trauma, seeing it in a different light, and maybe even finding some meaning or understanding that wasn't there before.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
To be able to shift your whole perspective on something that's caused so much pain. You know, when I was reading through this manual, one thing that really stuck with me was how they talked about trauma being stored in the body.
Yeah.
I hadn't really thought about it that way.
That's so important. Trauma doesn't just live in your mind, right? It affects your whole being, like even your physical body.
Yeah.
All that fear, the tension, the fight or flight stuff,
Right.
it gets stored in your muscles, your tissues, your nervous system.
So it's like your body's holding on to the trauma.
Yeah.
Even if your mind's trying to move on. Does MDMA help with that too?
It seems to. It's like it helps loosen those knots,
Yeah.
allowing those trapped emotions and sensations to come up and release. There's this case in the manual where someone described feeling this wave of energy move through their body, releasing years of tension they didn't even know they were holding.
Wow. That's powerful. I can see how that physical release would be huge for healing. I'm also curious about the role of touch in this therapy. It seems like a sensitive area, especially when we're talking about trauma.
Yeah, you're right. Touch is a powerful tool, and it has to be used super carefully and respectfully. It's always with explicit permission from the person. And it's never sexual. It's more about providing comfort and safety.
It's like a way of communicating care and support.
Exactly. And for someone who's experienced neglect or abuse, that kind of nurturing touch can be so healing. It can almost be like a corrective experience, helping them feel safe and cared for in a way they maybe never have before.
That makes sense. You know, the manual also mentions that people sometimes have these spiritual experiences during the sessions. I have to admit, I'm intrigued by this idea of therapy and MDMA and spirituality all mixed together.
Definitely interesting territory. And it's important to say we're not talking about like organized religion or anything like that.
Right.
It's more about a sense of transcendence, of connection to something bigger than yourself, a deeper understanding of your place in the world.
Like expanding your sense of self and your connection to something larger. Do you think those kinds of experiences are hard to integrate back into everyday life?
They can be. It's like coming back from this incredible journey and trying to explain it to someone who's never left home.
Yeah.
But that's where the therapists help, helping people make sense of it all and ground those experiences in their daily lives.
Bridging that gap between the extraordinary and the ordinary. Okay, so we've talked about the physical and spiritual aspects of trauma. The manual also talks about something called the multiplicity of the psyche. What does that mean?
So it's this idea that our psyches aren't these, single solid things. We have all these different parts or subpersonalities, like the inner critic, the protector, the child within.
It's like having an internal cast of characters.
Exactly. And sometimes those parts are in conflict, creating all this inner turmoil.
Especially with trauma. I imagine those parts can get even more fragmented.
Exactly. Trauma can lead to dissociation where those parts split off to cope. But what's interesting is that MDMA in this therapeutic setting, it seems to help integrate those fragmented parts.
So it's like mending those internal fractures.
Yeah.
Helping the person feel more whole.
Exactly. And as those parts become more integrated, well, there's often this greater sense of self-awareness and self-compassion. You can understand and accept those different parts of yourself instead of fighting them all the time.
It sounds like embracing all parts of yourself, even the messy ones, is a key part of healing. This has been so insightful. But before we move on, I think it's important to remember that even though MDMA shows a lot of promise for PTSD, it's still experimental.
You're absolutely right. It's not like you can just go to any clinic and ask for this treatment.
So where does the research stand right now? And what are the chances that MDMA-assisted psychotherapy could become a legitimate option for people with PTSD in the future?
Yeah, it feels like we're like right on the edge of something huge here.
Yeah.
But I know it's not that simple to just like make it available for everyone. No, you're right about that. Right now, MDMA is classified as a Schedule I substance,
Right.
which means it's not approved for medical use.
Yeah.
But the research on MDMA-assisted psychotherapy for PTSD, it's been getting a lot of attention. And the results have been really, really promising.
So there's a chance this could actually become a real treatment option someday.
Oh, absolutely. In fact, the FDA has already given it breakthrough therapy designation.
Whoa, really?
Yeah, so they're speeding up the approval process because they see how much potential it has.
That's amazing. It sounds like things are moving in the right direction. What do you think this means for the future of mental health treatment if this therapy becomes more available? Could it be a game changer for other things too?
It's definitely a really exciting time for mental health research.
Hmm.
Most of the focus right now is on PTSD, but there's growing interest in using MDMA-assisted psychotherapy for other things too, like anxiety, depression, maybe even addiction.
Yeah, that makes sense. Being able to really access and process those difficult emotions in a safe way. It's easy to see how that could help with a lot of different mental health challenges.
Exactly. And even beyond specific conditions, this kind of therapy really makes you think about the nature of healing. If combining MDMA with therapy can help people face their deepest fears and find healing, what does that tell us about how resilient we are, about how much potential we have to overcome things?
That's such a powerful question. It really makes you wonder what's possible when it comes to healing and changing.
It does. And it shows how important it is to keep exploring these new frontiers in mental health treatment with curiosity, but also with caution, of course.
Well, I think we've given our listeners a lot to think about today. We've covered so much, from understanding how complex PTSD is to the potential of this MDMA-assisted psychotherapy. This has been a fascinating deep dive.
It has. And as the research continues, I think it'll be really interesting to see how MDMA-assisted psychotherapy shapes the future of mental health treatment and how it changes what we know about human consciousness and healing.
I don't know about you, but I'm leaving this conversation feeling pretty hopeful. It's inspiring to see how science and human creativity can